November 12th, 1989, Checkpoint Charlie, the most famous border crossing between East and West Berlin. 3 days have passed since the Berlin Wall unexpectedly opened. 3 days of chaotic celebration and tentative exploration as East Germans who have spent decades trapped behind concrete barriers finally cross into West Berlin. Ralf Müller, 22 years old, stands at the checkpoint in his East German border guard uniform. Though today he's not checking documents or maintaining security, he is crossing into West Berlin himself for the first time in his life. Müller has served as a border guard for 3 years, stationed at various checkpoints around Berlin, trained extensively in procedures for preventing East Germans from escaping to the West. His training included detailed briefings about Western society, lessons taught by Stasi officers, who explained that capitalism created homelessness, poverty, and exploitation. He's been told that Western prosperity is propaganda, that photographs of filled store shelves are staged, that Western department stores are elaborate facades maintained specifically to impress visiting foreigners. Müller crosses the checkpoint with a colleague, another young guard named Klaus Hoffmann, both carrying limited West German currency provided by friends who crossed earlier and returned with stories that seem impossible. Their destination is KaDeWe, Kaufhaus des Westens, the department store of the West, located on Tauentzienstrasse in the heart of West Berlin. The building is massive, 7 stories of retail space that occupies an entire city block. East German propaganda has specifically mentioned KaDeWe in briefings as an example of capitalist deception, a showpiece maintained to create false impressions of Western abundance. Müller expects to see a carefully curated display designed for propaganda purposes. What he doesn't expect is what he finds when he reaches the 6th floor food hall. The space extends across the entire floor, with sections devoted to different food categories, creating what looks like a grocery store crossed with a gourmet market. Müller walks through the cheese section first. The refrigerated displays stretch for what seems like 50 meters, organized by country of origin and type. French cheeses, Italian cheeses, Swiss cheeses, cheeses from places he's never heard of, more than 200 varieties according to the signs. Müller moves to the wine section, trying to process what he's seeing. The shelves reach from floor to ceiling, organized by region and vintage, with more than 2,500 different labels available for purchase. Wines from France, Italy, Spain, California, Australia, places he's read about in geography books but never imagined he'd see products from. East Germany produces 12 state-approved wines, mostly sweet varieties made from domestic grapes. In East German stores, you ask for wine and receive whatever bottle happens to be available that week. Here, customers choose from thousands of options, with staff available to discuss vintages and pairings and regions. The bread section offers more than 300 varieties baked fresh that morning. Whole grain, rye, sourdough, French baguettes, Italian ciabatta, rolls, specialty breads Müller doesn't recognize. East German bakeries sell 4 types of bread, and you queue for an hour to purchase whatever hasn't sold out. Müller stops walking. His hands are shaking. His breathing has become irregular. Klaus notices and asks if he's ill, if they should leave. Müller can't articulate what he's feeling. Everything he's been taught his entire life, about Western poverty, about socialist superiority, about the necessity of the wall to protect East Germans from capitalist exploitation, is collapsing in real time as he confronts physical evidence that contradicts every lesson the state taught him. The abundance isn't staged. This isn't a propaganda display maintained for show. The food hall is crowded with ordinary West Berliners doing routine shopping, filling baskets with products they're choosing from impossible variety, paying with casual ease for quantities of food that would represent weeks of shopping in East Berlin. Müller finally speaks. I thought all of this was propaganda. Photographs staged, displays maintained for visitors. But it's real. This is how they actually live. We've been lied to about everything. Klaus nods slowly. He's experiencing the same cognitive dissonance, the same fundamental questioning of everything he believed about the system he's served. They spend 4 hours in KaDeWe, walking through department after department, confronting category after category of abundance. The electronics section displays Sony Walkman portable cassette players, Panasonic televisions with remote controls, Apple computers, Nintendo game consoles, cameras, stereos, equipment they've only seen in Western magazines that occasionally circulated secretly in East Berlin. None of these products exist in East German stores. The most advanced electronics available in East Germany are state-produced radios and black and white televisions that require months of waiting lists. The clothing departments showcase fashion from Paris, Milan, New York. Current season designs displayed on mannequins, available in multiple sizes and colors, purchasable without ration cards or waiting lists. East German clothing is utilitarian, styled to patterns from the 1960s. Available in limited colors and sizes through state stores, where fashionable items require personal connections to acquire. By the time they leave KaDeWe, both guards have made their decision. They walk to the nearest West Berlin police station and request political asylum, formally defecting from East Germany and requesting permission to remain in the West. They will never return to their apartments in East Berlin, never resume their positions as border guards, never again pretend they believe in the system they were raised to defend. They join at least 13 other East German border guards who make similar decisions during these 4 days in mid-November, unable to reconcile what they've witnessed with continuing to serve a state that maintained such comprehensive deception about the reality existing mere kilometers from where they'd lived their entire lives. To understand the shock these guards experienced, you need to understand what life in East Germany actually looked like for the 40 years the German Democratic Republic existed. The East German economy operated under strict state control, with centralized planning determining what would be produced, in what quantities, for what prices. Consumer goods received low priority in economic planning because communist ideology emphasized heavy industry and military production as markers of national strength. The result was a consumer economy offering approximately 200 distinct product categories across all retail sectors. Basic foods were available: bread, milk, potatoes, cabbage, but variety was minimal and availability inconsistent. East German supermarkets might stock 3 types of canned vegetables, 4 types of sausage, 8 types of cheese, and 12 wines. Selection did not mean choosing what you wanted. It meant purchasing what happened to be available when you arrived at the store. The shopping experience itself reflected the scarcity. Queuing was a fundamental part of East German life. You queued at bakeries for bread, at butcher shops for meat, at general stores for household goods. Wait times varied from 30 minutes to several hours, depending on the product and time of day. When desirable items appeared, imported coffee, oranges from Cuba, chocolate, word spread through neighborhoods and queues formed immediately, often blocks long. The queue itself created a social experience where East Germans exchanged information about where products were available, what stores had received shipments, which connections might help acquire scarce items. Having connections, knowing store managers, factory workers, party officials, meant access to products unavailable through normal channels. A bottle of Western whiskey, a color television, stylish clothing, a bicycle. These items required connections because official channels couldn't provide them in sufficient quantities. The Trabant automobile epitomized East German consumer economy limitations. The Trabant was a small car with a 2-stroke 26-horsepower engine and a body made from Duraplast, recycled plastic reinforced with fibers. The design dated from the 1950s and received only minimal updates through 4 decades of production. Acquiring a Trabant required joining a waiting list, paying a deposit, and waiting 10 to 15 years for delivery. The waiting time was an exaggeration. East Germans routinely registered for Trabant purchases when their children were born, hoping delivery would occur by the time the child reached driving age. The alternative was purchasing a used Trabant on the secondary market, where demand so exceeded supply that used Trabants often sold for more than new ones cost-efficiently. West Germans drove Mercedes-Benz sedans with 130 horsepower engines, leather interiors, and advanced safety features that could be purchased from dealerships the same day. East German border guards like Müller occupied relatively privileged positions within the DDR system. His monthly salary of 800 East German marks placed him comfortably in the middle class by East German standards. He had access to border guard housing, state-subsidized meals, and could purchase goods in special stores serving security services that carried products unavailable to ordinary citizens. By East German measures, Müller lived well. But that salary and those privileges meant nothing when converted to Western purchasing power. 800 East German marks might buy 30 meals in East German restaurants or 2 pairs of quality shoes through official channels. The same pretty 800 marks exchanged for West German currency bought perhaps 20 meals in average West Berlin restaurants or 1 good pair of Western shoes. The purchasing power gap revealed that comfortable East German living standards were poverty by Western measures. The propaganda border guards received about West Berlin emphasized themes designed to justify the wall's existence and explain why preventing East Germans from escaping served their protection. Stasi briefings taught that West Berlin was a capitalist hellhole where unemployment reached 30%, where homeless people crowded streets, where crime made venturing out after dark dangerous. Guards were told that images of Western prosperity were carefully staged propaganda, that photographs of filled store shelves showed Potemkin establishments maintained to deceive observers, that the apparent abundance was facade masking desperate poverty most Western citizens experienced. These lessons weren't subtle suggestions. They were explicit training emphasizing that guards protected East Germans from exploitation, that the wall represented defensive necessity rather than imprisonment. West Berlin reality contradicted every element of this propaganda so completely that experiencing it firsthand created the cognitive dissonance that drove guards like Müller to defect. West Berlin in the 1980s was a prosperous modern city with unemployment below 10%. Comprehensive social services, providing support for those experiencing difficulties, and crime rates lower than many American cities. The prosperity wasn't concentrated among wealthy elites. It was broadly distributed across the population in ways visible to any observer walking city streets. Working-class neighborhoods featured modern apartment buildings with private bathrooms, central heating, and reliable electricity. Middle-class areas showcased single-family homes with gardens, garages housing modern automobiles, and consumer electronics visible through windows. The contrast with East Berlin, where many apartment buildings still shared communal bathroom facilities and experienced intermittent heating and power, was stark. KaDeWe department store represented the pinnacle of West Berlin retail, but wasn't unique. West Berlin featured dozens of large department stores and hundreds of smaller specialty shops, all offering product variety that dwarfed anything available in East Germany. The food hall that stunned Müller was one of multiple gourmet food markets in the city. The 1-200 cheese varieties were not the result of special inventory for show. That represented normal stock for a market serving affluent customers who expected extensive selection. West Berlin supermarkets, designed for everyday shopping, carried 10,000 to 15,000 distinct products compared to the few hundred products East German stores offered. The difference wasn't just quantity, it was fundamental approach to retail. West Berlin stores competed for customers by offering variety, quality, and service. East German stores distributed rationed products to citizens who had no alternatives. The restaurant scene illustrated the lifestyle gap clearly. West Berlin offered more than 5,000 restaurants representing every cuisine imaginable: German, French, Italian, Chinese, Japanese, Turkish, Middle Eastern, American, cuisines from countries East Germans had never visited and barely read about. A typical meal at an average West Berlin restaurant cost 30 to 50 Deutsche Marks, roughly $20 to $30 at 1989 exchange rates. This meant an East German border guard's monthly salary, when converted to Western currency, could purchase approximately 20 restaurant meals. East Berlin had perhaps 200 restaurants, mostly serving standardized German cuisine, with waits for tables often exceeding an hour. East Germans typically ate at home because restaurant dining represented luxury rather than routine option. The automobile situation demonstrated the system's comparison most visibly. West Berlin streets featured Mercedes, BMW, Porsche, Volkswagen, and imported vehicles from Japan and America. Parking lots outside shopping centers and apartment buildings showed hundreds of modern vehicles, most manufactured within the previous 5 years. East Berlin parking areas contained predominantly Trabants and Wartburgs, the two primary East German automobile manufacturers, with occasional Soviet Ladas or Czech Skodas mixed in. More than 80% of East German vehicles were Trabants, making the distinctive two-stroke engine exhaust and characteristic shape ubiquitous throughout the city. West Germans purchased automobiles as consumer products, choosing models based on preference and budget, taking delivery within days or weeks. East Germans registered for automobiles like applying for housing, waiting years for allocation, and driving whatever vehicle they were assigned. When the Berlin Wall opened on November 9, 1989, the initial response was cautious exploration. East Germans crossed checkpoints tentatively, uncertain whether border guards would actually allow passage, expecting at any moment the closure of this unexpected opening. As hours passed and the borders remained open, caution gave way to celebration, and then to mass crossings as millions of East Germans seized the opportunity to see West Berlin for themselves. During the first week after the opening, more than 2 million East Germans entered West Berlin, approximately half the entire East German population within range of Berlin. These weren't tourists on vacation. These were people who'd spent decades hearing about the West, wondering if propaganda was true, and now suddenly able to investigate personally. The documented reactions to first encounters with Western consumer abundance followed consistent patterns that witnesses reported repeatedly. At KaDeWe and other major department stores, Western observers described watching East Germans enter, proceed through departments in silence, and stop walking as they confronted the scale of product variety. Many East Germans cried openly as they stood in aisles, staring at shelves filled with products. Some refused to believe what they were seeing was real, insisting to Western shoppers that the stores must be special displays staged for their benefit. Western shoppers, attempting to reassure them that this was normal everyday shopping, encountered East Germans who couldn't process that level of abundance as routine reality. Supermarkets created particularly powerful reactions, because food shopping was a universal experience that everyone understood. East Germans who had spent their lives queuing for hours to purchase limited selections walked into West Berlin supermarkets offering 200 breakfast cereal varieties, 50 types of cheese, 100 varieties of bread, entire aisles devoted to products that didn't exist in East Germany. Multiple witnesses reported seeing East German families standing paralyzed in supermarket aisles, unable to move, overwhelmed by choice. Some East Germans filled shopping carts with items they'd never seen available: exotic fruits, imported chocolates, diverse cheeses, pushed the carts to checkout and broke down crying when cashiers rang up purchases, and they realized they could actually buy everything in their cart. Western cashiers initially didn't understand these emotional reactions, but as days passed, and the pattern repeated, they came to recognize that they were witnessing people experiencing consumer abundance for the first time in their lives. The technology gap manifested visibly in public spaces. West Berlin teenagers carried Sony Walkmans, portable cassette players that allowed them to listen to music while walking through the city. East German youth had never seen such devices. Portable electronics didn't exist in East German consumer markets. Game Boys, portable video game systems, created similar astonishment among young East Germans who'd grown up with state-produced toys and limited entertainment options. West Berlin electronics stores displayed computers, video cameras, advanced stereos, equipment that East Germans recognized from Western magazines but had never seen in person. The demonstration units that allowed customers to try equipment before purchase drew crowds of East Germans operating devices they'd previously only imagined. The border guard defections that occurred between November 12th and November 15th reflected a specific subset of East Germans who experienced particularly acute cognitive dissonance. These guards had been selected for border security positions specifically because authorities believed they were ideologically reliable, committed to the socialist system, willing to prevent escape attempts by force if necessary. Their training emphasized that they protected East Germans from Western exploitation. When these ideologically vetted guards witnessed West Berlin and recognized that everything they'd been taught was false, the psychological impact was severe. They couldn't return to their posts and continue serving a system they now understood had deceived them completely. At least 15 guards defected during this 4-day period, with likely more defections occurring that weren't documented immediately because chaos of the period made tracking difficult. The guards' explanations for defecting followed consistent themes. They described believing they were protectors, that border security served legitimate defensive purpose by preventing East Germans from making mistakes that would harm them. Seeing West Berlin revealed they had been prison guards, maintaining a population in poverty while prosperity existed kilometers away. Some guards described feeling betrayed. They'd served faithfully, believed propaganda, defended the system, and now recognized they'd wasted years of their lives enforcing lies. Others expressed anger at the deception, fury that their superiors had known the truth about Western prosperity while feeding guards propaganda about capitalist poverty. The emotional processing was not just about consumer goods. It was about recognizing that the fundamental justification for their work, for the wall, for the entire East German system, was built on comprehensive deception about basic reality. Western press interviewing East Germans during this period documented responses that revealed the psychological impact. An East German teacher told reporters, "My father died 3 years ago, still believing Western prosperity was propaganda. He spent his entire life defending the socialist system, believing we were building something better than what existed in the West. I've now seen West Berlin with my own eyes. He wasted his life defending a lie, and I'll never forgive the system that deceived him." A factory worker from East Berlin stood in a Western supermarket for 2 hours, unable to leave, trying to process what he was seeing. All of this existed 5 kilometers from my apartment. My wife and I waited 3 months to purchase oranges last Christmas. My children have never eaten a banana. This supermarket has fresh tropical fruit every day, year-round. I stood in line for hours to buy basic food while people here choose from endless abundance. I can't return to my life pretending I don't know this exists. The economic systems comparison that created this gap was fundamental rather than incremental. West Germany operated a social market economy that combined free market competition with social welfare programs. Companies competed for consumer business, driving innovation and efficiency. Successful products generated profits that funded further development. Poor products lost market share and disappeared. And the system incentivized constantly improving quality and expanding variety because companies that satisfied consumers succeeded while companies that didn't failed. East Germany operated a command economy where state planning determined production. Factories received quotas for specific products regardless of consumer demand. There was no competition because the state owned all production. There was no innovation incentive because factories received funding whether products satisfied consumers or not. The system optimized for meeting production quotas, not for serving consumer needs. The historical roots of this economic divergence extended to the immediate post-World War II period. West Germany received Marshall Plan assistance from the United States, approximately $1.4 billion between 1948 and 1952, equivalent to more than $100 billion in modern currency when adjusted for inflation and economic growth. This assistance funded rebuilding industrial infrastructure with modern equipment and efficient processes. East Germany experienced Soviet reparations instead of assistance. The Soviet Union extracted more than $10 billion worth of factories, equipment, and production from East Germany, dismantling facilities and transporting them to the Soviet Union. East Germany was left with obsolete 1930s-era infrastructure and limited capital for modernization. The international trade environment reinforced these differences. West Germany integrated into the global economy, importing products from around the world and exporting high-quality manufactured goods. German consumers could purchase the best products available globally: Japanese electronics, French wines, Italian fashion, because international trade brought those products to German stores. East Germany traded primarily within the Soviet bloc, limited to products from communist countries. The quality and variety available from Soviet, Polish, Czech, or Hungarian manufacturers couldn't match Western production. East German consumers were restricted to inferior products not by choice, but by the system's isolation from global trade. By 1989, these accumulated differences had created an economic gap so wide that the two Germanys barely resembled each other. When the Berlin Wall fell in November 1989 and German reunification followed in October 1990, the economic integration proved catastrophic for East German industry. Once borders opened and East Germans could purchase Western products, demand for East German goods evaporated. Why purchase a Trabant requiring years of waiting when you could buy a used Volkswagen immediately? Why buy East German electronics when superior Japanese and Western models were available? Why accept limited selection from East German stores when Western supermarkets offered abundance? The East German industrial base couldn't compete with Western production once protected markets disappeared. Most major East German brands, Trabant, Wartburg, and dozens of others, ceased production between 1990 and 1995, unable to survive in competitive markets. Berlin today is a unified city where the physical divisions have largely disappeared. The former East Berlin has been rebuilt to Western standards, with modern infrastructure, renovated buildings, and integrated services. But economic gaps persist decades after reunification. Eastern German states still experience higher unemployment and lower average wages compared to Western German states. The population outflow from east to west that began when borders opened continues, as young people seek better opportunities in Western Germany. The scars of 4 decades of separation haven't fully healed even after 3 decades of reunification. The border guards who defected in November 1989 have been interviewed multiple times over the past 30 years, and their assessments remain consistent. In interviews conducted in 2019 for the 30th anniversary of the wall's opening, multiple former guards stated that defecting was the best decision they ever made. They rebuilt lives in unified Germany, pursued careers that wouldn't have been available in East Germany, and raised children who grew up without experiencing the divisions and limitations that defined their parents' youth. But they also carry psychological scars from recognizing how completely they were deceived, from understanding they spent years serving a system built on lies, from knowing their own families were imprisoned while they guarded the walls, maintaining that imprisonment. The broader lesson that East German experiences in West Berlin illustrated was the fundamental difference between economic systems that empower individual choice versus systems that impose centralized control. West Berlin prosperity wasn't accidental or natural. It resulted from deliberate policy choices that prioritized individual freedom, market competition, and integration with global trade. East Berlin poverty wasn't accidental either. It resulted from policy choices that prioritized state control, centralized planning, and isolation from competitive pressures. When populations from these different systems suddenly could compare their realities directly, the differences were so stark that cognitive dissonance drove people like Müller and Hoffman to make life-changing decisions within hours. The wall had served its purpose for 28 years, preventing East Germans from escaping to the West by making escape physically impossible. But the wall couldn't prevent information from crossing, couldn't entirely suppress knowledge that different systems existed, couldn't eliminate the questions that arose when people wondered why such barriers were necessary if socialism was truly superior. When the wall finally opened and East Germans could investigate directly, the system's legitimacy collapsed immediately because the deception was too comprehensive to maintain once people witnessed reality for themselves. East German border guards had guarded the wall believing they protected their people from capitalist exploitation. West Berlin showed them they had been prison guards, keeping people trapped in poverty while abundance existed just beyond the barriers they maintained. The recognition that everything they'd been taught was false, that their service supported imprisonment rather than protection, that their own government had comprehensively deceived them about basic reality, this recognition drove guards to defect within days of seeing West Berlin for the first time. The wall had kept East Germans physically contained, but it couldn't survive the cognitive comparison once people saw both sides and recognized which society actually served human needs. East Germans guarded wall to keep people in. West Berlin showed them why everyone wanted out.